What's an unknown disturbing fact? Your eyes have a separate immune system than the rest of your body, and if your normal immune system ever learns about your eyes, it will target them, and you'll go blind. You've probably been closer to dying multiple times in your life than you even know. Just got lucky, or unlucky depending on who you are. Most of the time we are all walking around with a couple pounds of poop inside us. When you reach a certain age, you become less relevant to people. If your esophagus closes and you cannot swallow, you have about 2 minutes before saliva starts reaching your windpipe. It is not a long time, but it is long enough to panic. I have eosinophilic esophagitis and have had food stuck in the esophagus for up to 24 hours before, and it's horrible. You don't realize how much saliva you swallow. To be constantly choking and vomiting, that backup isn't the best experience. Microplastics. This stuff is an alarming rate in all food sources. All the trace amount reports are done in relatively less polluted countries. So imagine the actual level of pollution in some heavily polluted countries. There is a chance in the next decade we will have a new disease called microplastic-induced atherosclerosis. It may seem like we know a lot about the human brain, but our standard way of studying brain activity is in fMRI, where a single pixel contains over 3 million neurons. That is more than many vertebrate animals' entire brains. The truth is, we really have no idea how the brain gives rise to consciousness, and even if we somehow perfectly worked out all the neural correlates of consciousness, so we could say a mental state happens, if and only if some exact pattern of brain activity happens, we would still have the hard problem of consciousness. Why do these physical processes give rise to raw subjective experience, rather than just happening in the dark? There are more slaves alive today than were ever traded during the 400 to 500 years of the Atlantic slave trade. The scrotum is a weak point in the abdominal cavity. When extreme force is applied, it's the first to give. So if you're run over at the right angle by something like a garbage truck, your body may actually look pretty good, but all of your insides can blast out through your scrotum, including your liver, which if you didn't know, is massive compared to your scrotum. Also, never use your foot to shove branches farther into a wood chipper. If your foot gets caught, it will wood chip you up to your ribcage before anyone has a chance to hit the stop button. I worked at a medical examiner's office. These actually happened. There is no physical evidence to say that today is Thursday. We all just have to trust that someone has kept count. Since the first one ever, Apollo 11 only had around 15 to 20 seconds of fuel left when it finally landed. The sun may have exploded, and we wouldn't know it for at least 8 minutes. Nothing is solid in the way you might think. Everything is made of vibrating particles. Playing the odds, the human race is unlikely to survive the next million years. There's a whole bunch of missing nuclear weapons around the world, so common that the IS actually had a term for it: broken arrow events. Some of these weapons have never been found. Notably, at least one was accidentally dropped over the US some years back and was never found. One also reportedly appeared on the black market at one point. Sleep tight. Actually, of most if not all of these it is at least somewhat known where they are, with a lot of them simply being inaccessible without extreme effort. At least one is stuck somewhere in a swamp, but they don't know exactly where, and they can't be bothered to retrieve the nuke, because it simply wouldn't be worth the effort. Anyone who'd want to retrieve that nuke would most likely have to excavate large portions of that swamp, which is assuming that the aircraft hasn't sunk God knows how deep into the mud and muck. Others are somewhere at the bottom of the sea. You're not retrieving those either, and neither is anyone else really. The Japanese royal family is quite inbred. Historically, they were only allowed to marry people from other notable, affluent families, which eventually made everyone related by blood in some way or another. In the 9th to 13th centuries, the Fujiwara family dominated the Japanese political sphere and pushed their daughters to become the emperor's wives and concubines, and the emperor was often the daughter's cousin. The four most recent emperors are known sufferers from the family inbreeding. Emperor Meiji. All of his brothers did not live past the age of 3, and if you Google a picture of his father, Emperor Komei, Emperor Taisho, speculated to be mentally challenged. His files were hidden for years and were not released until recently. There is a story that he used an official document as paper toy binoculars when he was meeting with ambassadors. Emperor Hirohito Probably the most obvious one, he married his cousin, Naruhito, most recent emperor. It is said that the long-term inbreeding rendered him close to sterile. He was only able to have one daughter. The coronation laws were looked into being updated, but that was set aside after Naruhito's sister-in-law, Princess Kiko, delivered a son at 40, at the risk of eclampsia as well. For a long time the royal photographers were not allowed to photograph the emperors sideways, since quite a few of them had chin deformities. Habsburg much. They also have an odd rule that the men are allowed to marry non-royals, but if a woman does so, she loses her royal status. Look up Princess Mako, TLDR. If you think the Japanese royal family is normal, you probably don't see the dead siblings who didn't sit on the throne. Update. Thank you all for the insightful comments and further facts. I'm so glad more folks find this interesting. The acceptable limits of non-food items, hair, insects, rat feces etc. in food is a lot higher than you want to spend time thinking about. For instance, 30 pieces of insect or 1 rodent hair per 100 g of peanut butter is fine according to the FDA. It doesn't do any harm, evidently, but it's not exactly savory. This reminds me of a medical article I read. During the fugitive crisis here in Europe, some fugitives encountered nutrition issues. They cooked their traditional food, but with local ingredients, but those were produced with higher standards and sold cleaner than what they usually got in their country. They got less proteins and vitamins out of their meals due to the lack of insects. Not necessarily unknown, but I feel like most people try to avoid thinking about the fact that we are all floating on a rock in a sea of infinite darkness. There are things that could end all life on this planet in an instant and nothing we could do about it. And even beyond that, if our species did get wiped out, the universe wouldn't even notice or care. On a universal scale, we are completely insignificant. Fame and fortune. You do not want to be famous. It is not a pleasant experience. You should really want the fortune, not the fame. The fame is the curse that comes with fortune. Unless you're a narcissist, the temporary ego boost and perks are not worth it. Fame and achievements on social media are meaningless. The United States, mostly through the CIA, has interfered in over 80 foreign elections in the last 60 years, as well as dozens of coup attempts, and that's just the they admitted to. We literally have no idea what this is, what we are a part of, and our species has been trying to figure it out for thousands of years to no avail. A large part of what we do in our cultures and daily lives is to keep ourselves occupied to avoid the existential terror of knowing and intellectualizing that fact. Government is not your friend, and even around election time, when they are pandering to their constituents, they only do so to achieve their own ends. Governments do not care about those that they govern. Never have, never will. Cotard's delusion, also known as walking corpse syndrome, is a neuropsychiatric disorder in which the person is in eternal damnation. They literally believe they are dead or dying, or don't have organs. The amount of despair is unimaginable and simply can't be grasped by people not suffering from it. Democracy has been on a steady decline for the last 15 years. No, it isn't rebounding, and doesn't show many signs of doing so. Authoritarian regimes and dictatorships actually outnumber democratic states by a lot.